You're listening to Generation Jones, 1954 to 1964. Conversations with remarkable people who have shaped our world. I'm your host, Wendi Cooper, and I do hope you enjoy the show. Marc Anthony, the psychic lawyer, is the author of the award-winning, critically acclaimed bestsellers, Never Letting Go and Evidence of Eternity. He is a world-renowned fourth-generation psychic medium who communicates with spirits. Marc has been featured in Hollywood Times, the Huffington Post, the New York Post, Lifestyle Magazine, Publishers Weekly, Natural Awakenings, The Inquisitor, Staten Island Today, OM Times, Elite Man Magazine, Sedona Red Rock News, City Sun Times, Infinity Magazine, and Spirituality Today. Marc, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Wendi. It is really great being back on the air with you. I always enjoy our conversations.
Well, you've been one of my biggest proponents to get back on the air. In the past 2 years, I have been off the air. And you every once in a while chime in and say, you need to get back on air. So thank you for that encouragement.
And thank you for following the advice because, it's Wendi, is you make being interviewed fun. I'm on shows all over the country, and interviewers all have their own style. But I guess it's your engaging and friendly way because you drag all sorts of stuff out of me.
Well, I don't mean to be dragging anything out of you.
Well, I don't mean it like that, but yeah, it's always fun, and I think that's what's so important about what you do is that there's no topic that you won't approach. And that's very, very important, especially in this day and age. I mean, we're in a very, very difficult time, I think, in the world right now and on several levels.
Well, we definitely are in a, it's not like you can even put it into words, Marc, It's so, I was inspired to do Generation Jones because it is a generation. You're part of the Jonesers generation. I am too. And I'm sure you have felt as though the same way I've felt over the years, whenever we get referred to as being a baby boomer, it's like, wait a minute. No, we're not. I cannot relate to that generation, the older boomers, at all. And I think that we are a very specific generation and we are very influential. And we just, I need to shine a spotlight on that because there's so much happening out there between the workforce and the transitions to retirement and all of these challenges that even people in their early 50s, mid-40s are having, when it comes to, oh gosh, it's just a real change. Things are really changing, like you said. They're really changing.
Well, they are, and I'm glad that you brought that up because, they say the baby boomer, because we're after that.
Yeah.
And what it is, we're technology savvy. We're interested in what's going on. I mean, my fan base, it's amazing. It's like my fan base is from 15 to 80. When I go to paranormal conferences, I mean, there's people that are in their 80s and even 90s that come to see me because they're interested in what I talk about in the afterlife. And then I get the teens and the millennials that are fascinated not just in the hauntings and the paranormal, but also in understanding the afterlife in terms of science and physics. And so how is it that you can pigeonhole us as, oh, well, you only appeal to millennials or you only appeal to this or that? And I think that pigeonholing somebody doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
It's interesting because I think that what's kind of happened in the past, I don't know how many years, but I see it with younger people that they are more accepting of the spirit, of being connected to the moment, of allowing this voice in to guide you and to listening to the voices that are out there, to meditation, to finding their way through connection.
I think so. And the reason for that, Wendi, is that in our modern world, and I certainly don't mean to insult or put down anybody's belief system, but these traditional religions that were created in the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, They simply aren't providing comfort and solace for people in the internet age. And people, are looking at traditional religions the way you and I might look at the gods of Mount Olympus. They're thinking that, this might be mythologically based. And I'm not saying that they are. I'm just saying that this is the perception. But people still feel that there is an afterlife. They still feel the presence of spirits, and they still feel that there is God, and that there is a power much greater than us that unites us and flows through us. And so the work that I do, not just as a psychic medium, but also as an afterlife expert, where I discuss how quantum physics and can explain and validate belief and proof of the afterlife, and even in the infinite intelligence of God, people want to hear that, as opposed to, the world was created in 7 days by a white guy sitting on a throne with a scepter. And but if you find comfort in putting a human face on God, so that he is a white guy or a brown guy or a black guy or an Asian guy or a woman sitting on a throne, that's fine. Because what we're trying to do is to make the infinite relatable to us on a personal level, which is an important step in the journey through faith.
Marc, why is it that people, where does the expression the fear of God? Why should anyone fear God?
Nobody should. What people should fear is karma, and perhaps karma is an instrument of God. But that God fearing, this came up in the Bronze Age, and certainly in the Iron Age, when the Romans took over Christianity, and then when the Muslims invented, or rather developed, their belief systems, is that God is depicted as a king, and kings are your protector until you defy and disobey the king, and then you will be punished. So there's this God as king. I am afraid of God. Well, first off, you should not be afraid of God, because God is pure love, light, energy, and creation. However, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. This is not philosophy. This is physics. And I do believe in the law, if you will, of karma. Hindus and Buddhists came up with this thousands of years ago, but every other religion, including Christianity and Islam and the Native American religions, talk about, whatever you reap, you shall sow. And so if you do lead this horrible life where you're a predator and you victimize people and you only think about yourself in a me sort of way, even if you die seemingly unscathed, there is reincarnation. And when you come back, well, everything balances out. So in some respects, you should fear not God, but you should fear the consequences of your own actions.
So are you saying that when somebody crosses over, that if they have bad karma, they will be reincarnated, so that they have to come back and have a do-over?
That seems to be based on I've done readings now for probably close to or over 15,000 people, and let's say 5 or 6 spirits come through in each reading, so we're talking a lot of spirits here, and they all talk about reincarnation without a hesitancy at all, and they all talk about karma, the law of balance, and everything balances out. And see, a lot of people, the reason that they're God-fearing is because if you're good, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go to hell. And that's, once again, God as the king, okay, the king who will punish. Whereas reincarnation, energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. So there's this ongoing process, and everything balances out. Plus, we go through a series of lessons, and when terrible things happen to us, it's how we react to them. And we're always given a choice of whether we're going to inflict negative things on other people. So that's why reincarnation is so important to understand. In fact, Wendi, in my work with near-death experiences, having had one myself as a young child, but also I've spoken a couple times at the International Association of Near-Death Studies just recently. Everyone who's had a near-death experience doesn't think there's reincarnation. They know there's reincarnation. And it really makes so much more sense than you are bad, so you're going to burn in a pit of fire for all of eternity. Yeah, that's a bunch of medieval, Dark Ages nonsense that was constructed by the Romans around the 4th century, and I can get into that if you want. But reincarnation, we go through a series of incarnations, a series of lives to experience all types of things in the material world that we cannot when we're in a purely energetic phase or state on the other side.
So when is it that we do get to go to the mountain on the top of the hill with the pearly gates open up and we don't ever have to worry about coming back and doing it again?
I've asked that question. I was in a very deep meditative state, and I asked to go, so do we ever get to be with God? And the response is, you're always connected to God. And I said, yeah, but I get that part. What about, do we ever get to not come back? They said, you get to a point where you no longer have to return to this dimension. I go, what does that mean? They said, when you are done with this dimension, you transfer to either like another planet or another dimension to begin a new cycle. And I was like, seriously? And I was like, oh my God. And they said, but that is the way of energy. I go, but do we ever get to be with God? They said, but you're always with God.
So Marc, let me, okay, so this is super interesting. For a couple of years, I studied, and I went to the Kabbalah Center here in Los Angeles. And this is the essence or the basis of Kabbalah is that there are the different dimensions, and that there's a thing called your tikkun, right? So you're on this earth, and you have a reason for being here, and you're born into a certain tikkun, and that tikkun is the thing that you have to work on in order to go to the next place to correct. And then when you cross over, when you pass, you go, hopefully you've corrected that. And then you go to the next dimension and the next dimension and the next dimension until you finally get to, I forget what it's called, to the last dimension. Okay? And that's when you're with God, right? But there is this process, and reincarnation is a very big part, I believe. I'm looking at Ari because she's from Israel, and she's of Judaism, of Kabbalah.
Yes.
Reincarnation is a very big part of that. So your message was coming loud and clear. Hey, you got to go through all of these different dimensions before you get to where you really want to be.
That's a really fascinating point that you brought up, Wendi, because in the Hasidic sect of Judaism, which is where the Kabbalah emanates from, and the mystical roots of Judaism, does discuss reincarnation. And people tend to think of reincarnation as strictly a Hindu or a Buddhist concept. Yet even in Christianity, there's the section in I think 3 different books. It's Matthew, Mark, and I think in Luke, where Jesus goes through the transfiguration. It's one of the most interesting passages in the New Testament, because he takes a select group of disciples to the top of a mountain, and he begins to glow white, and this misty substance forms around him, and then appears the images of Moses and Elijah. Now, for people who study physical mediumship, highly advanced mediums are able to project a substance from their body known as ectoplasm, which then takes the form of the spirit communicating. This would be an incredible description of physical mediumship. And so after they come off the mountain, there's this discussion Jesus has with the disciples, and he says, well, who do you say that I am? And they say, well, some say that you are the prophet Elijah returned, others say that you are John the Baptist. Well, Jesus replies that Elijah did return, but they did not recognize him, for he appeared in the form of John the Baptist. Now, John the Baptist was Jesus's first cousin, okay? So, and Elijah lived roughly 8 centuries earlier. Is that not then Jesus talking about reincarnation? Yeah, Elijah came back, but he looks just like John the Baptist because he was the same person. And so it is believed in a lot of circles that Christianity in the early centuries embraced and believed in reincarnation. In fact, one of the great Christian theologians, Origen of Alexandria, he lived in the 3rd century AD. He wrote about reincarnation as a succession of lifetimes. Well, 200 years after him, there was the 5th Ecumenical Council, and that was in Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, and that's where this capital of the empire, Roman Empire, was. And reincarnation was banned as heresy. So what happened was Origen's teachings were then suppressed, although there was a couple passages like the Transfiguration and the discussion of Elijah returning in the form of John the Baptist survived. And then there's also in Islam the concept of Ma'an. And Ma'an, Rumi, who was a medieval Islamic scholar, he's one of their great intellectuals. He said that, you come through a succession of lifetimes. So what we're seeing is not just Hinduism and Buddhism, but Judaism, Christianity, Islam also talk about a succession of lifetimes. And if you think about it, the more advanced spiritual leaders understand this, like Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, Moses. They talked about this because it makes so much more sense than you're bad. Okay, in this limited time that you're in this material world and you were a jerk and you did all these terrible things, so you have to spend eternity being tortured. If you'll indulge me for a minute.
Yeah.
Where does this concept of eternal damnation come from? In biblical times, in Judea, outside of Jerusalem, there's the Hinnom Valley, and there was a place called Gehenna. And for people who were criminals, or people who were dishonored, or people who could not afford a proper burial according to Jewish tradition, their bodies were put into these sulfur pits and burned, which were called brimstone. Fire and brimstone. So it started permeating a Jewish culture that if you're bad, this is where you end up with, in the fire and brimstone. Okay. So then when Christianity began to expand into the area, this concept of fire and brimstone got incorporated. Then the Roman Empire began to interact with the Germanic tribes and the god Loki. Okay, and you can look at the word Loki and the word Lucifer, and Loki was a mischievous god of the underworld, god of fire. Then the Romans also had Hades and this underworld concept. And so then by the 4th century, when the Emperor Constantine, the so-called first Christian emperor, decreed that the empire would now be Christian. It pretty much was anyway. I mean, nobody was believing in the Mount Olympus gods anymore, and he just wanted to make it official. And the imperial decree was that Jesus is the Son of God, Jesus was God on earth, and Jesus will return. But until he does, Constantine, Emperor of the Romans, is God's vicegerent on earth. In other words, he wrote himself into Christianity. And if you disobey the emperor and the Roman Empire, you will be cast into eternal damnation, into fire and brimstone. So by the 4th century, hell became firmly established in the Mediterranean world and then spread throughout Europe and the Middle East. And then, of course, Islam, essentially being an outgrowth of Christianity and Judaism, loves the concept of hell. And that's why we've ended up with this eternal damnation, because it's fear. And one thing the Romans understood very well was how to inflict fear.
Sure, they absolutely did. Wow, I just feel like I got the most awesome lesson from the Encyclopedia of Mark Anthony.
Well,
that was crazy.
Well, it's interesting when you start studying all of this, with the fire and the brimstone and all of that, and think about it. When it gets even better. Well, we're telling Constantine stories. So he says that he's God's representative on earth. Meanwhile, he sends his mother, Helena, to Jerusalem. All right. and because she's going on a pilgrimage. Well, she arrives. All right, this is the emperor's mother, the emperor who has absolute power of life over death over everyone in the Mediterranean world. So she probably shows up with a bodyguard of at least, 5,000 soldiers. And then, of course, her attendants, she got at least another 100 people, shows up in Jerusalem. There's 2 Roman legions stationed there. So, and then, of course, you got the officials and all the people in Judea. So you got about 20,000 people watching as she goes to Golgotha, the traditional site of where Christ was crucified, and they say, "Oh, here, dig a little over to the left. Oh my gosh, look, the emperor's mother found the one true cross, the one Jesus was crucified on." They probably, said it right there. This is the cross. And you figure the Roman legions, their bands, dun, da, 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 da. So now she is declared a saint. And Saint Helena brings the sacred relic of the one true cross back to Constantinople, the city of Constantine, which is now Istanbul. So what has Constantine done? Not only has he rewritten Christianity to make himself a facsimile of Jesus, but he creates his mother in the image of Mary, the mother of Jesus. She is the sainted mother of the sainted Roman emperor. Of course, he had pretty much everyone else in his family executed, and he was a homicidal, genocidal maniac. But hey, we gloss over that in religion. And and I know people get all bent out of shape about this, but please read history. Do study this. And so this is where these constructs came, and with that, the imposition of guilt and fear into religion, because Jesus didn't come to make people feel guilty. He didn't come to pass judgment and all that. He came to set an example for people to rise and be better. And so that's why this whole God-fearing concept started permeating religion. And it's really unfortunate. But now in this era, a lot of people, and that's why so many people, the millennials and people of all ages, come to me and to my colleagues who have background in near-death experiences and in spirit communication, because they want a connection with God that doesn't involve these arcane Bronze and Iron Age constructs which make people feel bad about themselves. People want to feel good. They want to have a sense of belongingness. They want to try to begin to understand the infinity that you and I call God, the energy which flows through and all of us and connects us.
So, Marc, you were talking about earlier. You were talking about you're studying more quantum physics. Did I catch that right?
Absolutely. I'm studying quantum physics as the basis for the afterlife and also for understanding what God is. I'm going to go on a little departure here for a second, but trust me, it'll come back around.
Okay.
Okay. How many of your listeners do you think have seen the Star Wars movies?
Well, a lot, except for the last one. But anyway.
Okay. All right. Pretty much everybody's familiar with Star Wars.
Yeah.
Okay. George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars, was 16 years old, and he was in a terrible accident, and he died. And he was dead for almost 20 minutes, and I guess they were working on him, and then he came back. And he had a near-death experience where his spirit left his body, went through the tunnel into the light, and he encountered, the other side. And for people like myself and so many millions of others around the world who will admit having had a near-death experience, what happens is when you encounter the light, we believe that the light is how we are perceiving the spiritual energy of God. Then you begin to see people who've passed. Okay? When you look at the Force, okay, which is what Jedi Knights and even Darth Vader and the bad guys all talk about, the light side and the dark side of the Force. And Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Jedi Master, says the Force is the energy which connects and binds everyone and flows through everyone. Okay, quantum physics. Everything is made of molecules, which are made of atoms, which are made of protons, electrons, and neutrons, which are made up on the most basic level of quanta, ergo quantum physics. And quanta is electromagnetic energy. So, Wendi, everything is electromagnetic energy. You, me, the air we're breathing, the radio waves that are transmitting this show, the light we see, the space between the earth and the stars and the sun, the nuclear reactions within the sun itself, everything in creation, everything which exists on its most basic level is electromagnetic energy, which is the force, comma, that is what we call God. And so I believe, based on the communication I've had with spirits, that God is this vast energy, because electricity, light, and energy transmits intelligence. So this intelligence permeates everything. Now, this also correlates with what all the religions say, is that God always was and always will be, world without end, everlasting, and that our soul pre-exists our body, comes into the body. When the body ceases to function, moves on. So George Lucas created the Force, I believe, based on his near-death experience, and of course he turned it into the Star Wars franchise. But when you study quantum physics, you start to see that everything is not only energy, but that's why everything is interconnected.
Okay, so here, there's a couple of things. One, while you were telling me that story about George Lucas, I actually was picturing what he saw when he had his near-death experience, and he was probably going in the light, and then he came out of it. But you know how the beginning of every Star Wars movie, you know how it does the rolling titles, and then it goes shoom, and it goes into the light.
Yeah.
You know, I have a sneaky feeling that maybe that's what he saw.
It very well may be. And think about what does let's talk about the Jedi Knight for a minute. A Jedi has a sense of timelessness, a sense of interconnectedness, does not turn to materialism. Love is the most potent force. It's all about truth and compassion. Okay, these are the gifts of the Spirit. This is what pure spirituality is all about. Whereas the dark side of the Force is belief in your own inner power, your self-centeredness, aggression, anger, which we could call the ego. The ego is a creature created by the human brain because it edges God out. It's all about me, self-centeredness, self-centeredness. So the light and the dark side of the Force is the balance between the ego created by the human brain in the material world versus the immortal living spirit that is represented by the positive ideals of the Jedi Knights, the light and dark side of the Force. Once again, same thing in physics. Electricity, energy, has both positive and negative charges. We know from what NASA has released is that there's dark matter, dark energy, and there's light energy and light matter. So I believe that this is on the path to understanding the nature of the afterlife and God a lot more than things written by men for men to keep men in power and subjugate women back in the Bronze and the Iron Age.
Yeah, it's not to go back to the Kabbalah thing, but this is the basis of Kabbalah. I'm telling you, it's the Big Bang. We're all energy. We're all light. There's, we're a vessel. We have to fill our vessel up. You have to give. You have to receive. All of everything that you're talking about. Although I don't study it, but I believe in the fundamentals of it. It's this power of the universal energy. Right, that we are all connected, and we all are starting to realize that we are connected in this way.
And that's because the Kabbalah is correct, and the teachings of Jesus are along those lines, as are Buddha and Krishna, because what it is, these great sages, they had an understanding of this, and what they did is they explained it and described it in the vernacular of the day. They didn't have the terminology of quanta and electromagnetic energy because that was discovered, that was discovered, or rather revealed, by Albert Einstein, Max Planck, and Werner Heisenberg roughly a century ago. And recently I was in Hawaii, and I was studying with the Kapu, who are their priests, their spiritual leaders of the ancient religion, and they talk about mana. And mana is the energy which flows through and everyone, connects everyone, and everything has its own unique mana. So 1,000 years ago, when the Hawaiians developed or revealed the concept of mana, it is parallel to what we now know from quantum physics. So what we're seeing in all these different cultures, I mean, in something as in a culture as remote and isolated as the Hawaiian Islands in the middle of the Pacific, yet Hindus were talking about this in India, as were Taoists in China, and Buddhists throughout Asia, Muslims, Christians. So when you get to the people that the enlightened leaders that have these tremendous insights and a spiritual connection with the infinite, they are describing what we now know from quantum physics to be the energetic interconnectedness of everything.
So this was awesome. I really want to talk to you about your books, which I love, because I do want people to know that these wonderful books are out there that do help so many people, Marc. And what you're up to, where you're going to be, how people get a hold of you. I'm just sitting here. I'm like speechless because you have just enlightened me so unexpectedly, so much that I literally am almost speechless. So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more with Marc Anthony after the break. You're listening to Generation Jones, 1954 to 1964. Conversations with remarkable people who shaped our world. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back. My guest today is Marc Anthony, psychic medium. I want to start this segment with saying that I have experienced firsthand Marc's incredible ability to connect with spirit. And I know how much I saw a transformation in my brother who lost his child after attending one of your a seminar. What do we call that, Marc? When you're at like the bookstore on Abbot Kinney and you have people there.
Well, I call them gallery events, and I go all over the country, and I speak at many locations. Sometimes they're metaphysical centers or bookstores, and Unity churches have been very welcoming to me, and other centers, conferences, expos, and colleges, universities, and the age range of people I talk to is everything from 15 to into their 90s, and what I do is, it's an evening or an afternoon, depending on the time of day, but usually an evening of spirit communication, where I open up my brain to higher frequencies and spirits come forward, and I connect random audience members with loved ones in spirit. And it's a healing session, and it's really amazing, some of the things that come through, and the spirits that come through, and the connections that are made. And the thing is, Wendi, it's just as big a surprise to me as it is to anybody else. It's just that I'm used to doing it. And
I can speak. Yeah. I can speak firsthand. So I want the audience to know that this was my experience after attending, and I can't remember if it was before you knew you had met me, or it does.
Nope.
It does.
It's before I knew, because after you came up and introduced yourself, and I was like, oh my God, yeah. Because what had happened was, I was in LA, and I knew that I was scheduled to be on a show, and I knew the host of the show's name was Wendi Cooper.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's all I knew. And so I'm doing this event, and then I did whatever I did, and then you came up afterwards and said, oh, by the way, you're on my show tomorrow, and I'm like, oh my God, so.
So it was really. It's not so much that it changed my life, but what happens in Marc's gallery sessions is he starts to talk about what he's seeing or feeling or smelling, right? And the people in the audience are supposed to kind of think about, is that me? Is that me? Is that me? Is it somebody that I know, whatever? And there was specific things that Marc said, and I thought, oh my God, that is my brother's son. It's Tommy, right? And then we continue. So I raised my hand, and I thought it was me. So anyway, make a long story short, there were things revealed to me that were a message from my brother's son who died in an accident when he was 10 years old. Now, I have no idea how my brother Peter has lived for the past 15 years having that happen to him. But I took the information that I had, I was convinced it was him. I took the information to my brother, drove all the way there the next day. I was terrified to have to talk about Tommy to my brother over lunch. Peter thought I was just coming down for a casual lunch. And I gave him the messages from Tommy. And they were so right on. Do you know that, because Tommy was saying he has to let it go until, this goes back to your book, Marc, until Peter lets go of the pain and understands that Tommy's life was short. It was meant to be short. Then he could never heal. And I told him all of these things that I had learned the night before. And my brother's life changed so remarkably, Marc. It's you see Peter now, and he's a different person because he's whole again. It's just, thank you, by the way. I never thanked you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I appreciate you letting me know, and it's very humbling to hear something like that, because I'm the conduit for the information, and that's why I do believe in God. I do not believe in God as a white guy sitting on a throne, but I believe in God as this vast, infinite intelligence and this love and this energy which is connected to us, and I always pray before I go to on stage to do an event that God sends forth spirits for the highest of purposes to bring messages of love, healing, and resolution. And no parent should go through the loss of a child, and so if I can facilitate a connection which helps alleviate in part some of that suffering, then it's a very, very humbling to do that. And the interesting thing is the amount of detail. That's why I'm known as an evidential medium. I just don't stand, and go, oh, you need to feel better, and your grandmother loves you. But they start giving me precise, dates, facts, figures, things that I could not possibly know. And sometimes the things are hysterically funny.
Yep.
And sometimes they're incredibly tragic. As well. But the thing is, spirits are never miserable. People always say, oh, well, are they alone? No, spirits are not alone. They can't be alone. They're pure energy. They're interconnected. And let me explain what I mean by interconnected. Think of your soul as a drop of water. And when you die, that drop of water plunges into a vast ocean, an eternal ocean. Therefore, it's part of everything everywhere. But we maintain our individuality, and we can disconnect from that in order to communicate. And one of the reasons that I wrote my first book, Never Letting Go, is to help people understand that you have to let go of the sorrow and the pain associated with the death, but never let go of the love that you have for the person.
Right.
And this runs somewhat contrary to what a lot of grief counselors and psychologists are like, you have to let go, you have to let go. Well, here's the thing. Your brother's never going to let go of his son,
right.
Nor should he. I'm never going to let go of my parents who've passed. But what we need to let go is the pain and the sorrow associated with their death. And so never letting go guides people on the journey through grief. It is inspirational with messages of love and healing from the other side. It is healing in that it teaches people about the process through grief, and it also teaches you to recognize when spirits are reaching out to make contact. And Never Letting Go is in a couple different languages, and it's still a spiritual bestseller. And then while I was on the Never Letting Go tour, Wendi, I started compiling the most frequently asked questions or concerns from people. Things about what happens if you commit suicide? Is there a God? Is there an afterlife? Is there a scientific basis for this and for spirit communication? What are the repercussions of suicide? Do animals have souls? And so that was the genesis, if you will, for Evidence of Eternity, which bridges the gap between the spiritual and the scientific by showing that the afterlife and spirit communication is based on sound scientific principles, can be proven through quantum physics, and that the teachings of the great sages were correct. It's just that you have to look at it in a broader sense. And Evidence of Eternity has been a major bestseller. It's in, I think, 6 or 7 languages now. It's on audio book as well. So if people are interested in my books, please visit my website, evidenceofeternity.com. It's the same as the book, Evidence of Eternity. And now I'm working on my third book. And, we've got a couple different working titles, but I've got a literary agent who we're fine tuning some of some of the
Content.
concepts, content. And so people should be on the lookout for my next book in late 2019, early 2020.
Well, I read both of your books and I love them, and they helped me so much with the passing of my mother. And I know that it was really remarkable because it was so funny because Marc said, somebody eats a lot of apples, apples, apples. Somebody eats a lot of apples. And you know what? It was Tommy's sister that was like overindulging in apples. I found that out. Marc also said someone's traveling. They're going to be traveling to Europe, When I'm talking to my brother, my brother and Ruth had a trip planned to Paris in March. So my brother was completely convinced, as was Tommy's sister, that it was Tommy. So it was awesome, the life-changing things that happened to all of them just because of this gentleman and his gift that he has. So thank you, Marc Anthony.
Oh, thank you, Wendy. I really appreciate that.
You've been listening to the wisdom of Marc Anthony, who is an author, medium, and Joneser. I'd like to thank Tom at Orsi Digital Media for his support of the show and his wonderful sound design. I'd also like to thank Skylar Billish for his original score that I adore. Make sure to subscribe everywhere you get your podcasts and listen at 7:30 a.m. on Monday mornings on UBN Radio. Thanks for listening.